been a while since I've recorded an episode. In fact, 2 weeks. So I apologize for all the fans or whoever has been watching the show and trying to get knowledge from the channel. I just had a lot of things going on personally. I recently had a surgery, and nothing like bad. It's just had a lot of things in my life in the last 2 weeks, and I just haven't been able to get an episode out, which is obviously not up to par with my New Year's resolution. But I'm here now, and I'm going to talk this week about harnessing play discipline. This is not a topic necessarily regarding any specific gimmicks or mechanics in the game, but like mostly a little chess action there. Mostly about talking about like what things I myself try to do to get better at getting what I consider play discipline, which is play discipline. And the way I would define it is making decisions I'm making in the game become a most muscle memory. Not like they're instinctual, but like I building the rigor in making these decisions, hopefully as time goes on faster and almost instantaneous, but I'm making sure I am covering as much of those things as possible while I'm playing the game. And the trick is the more you do it, the faster you'll get at it. The brain is just like any other muscle. As long as you get in the repetitive manner of doing these things, you'll get better at it. And I will be sharing a list, and I'll post in the comments of the video of like questions I wanted to, I ask myself, or I even ask people I coach or teach how to play the game, like, have you considered these things when you're making your decisions throughout the game? And play discipline is super important. It's what, if you're a player that's like floating between a 3-2 or 4-1 like event score, like, if you're basically like you're on the cusp of like maybe potentially having a 5-0, like really cementing that play discipline will help you basically cross the threshold as much as it will enable you to cross the threshold when it presents itself. Everybody, I think, knows a little bit about play discipline as they progress through the game. They kind of instinctively feel it out, like especially if you're playing one army, you're learning a lot of like things as you're playing the army to how it plays and how it should play against certain opponents on certain missions. Those are all like valuable things. But what I'm talking about here in today's episode is going to be a little bit more generalized and not necessarily about specific armies or so forth. It's just things that like you should always be thinking about, in my opinion, when you're playing your game, no matter what army you're playing with. And I'm sorry if my Carrot on Overlord beanie is like kind of blending in with my green screen here. And yes, it's Carrot Drawn Week. The book gets officially released next Saturday. I have been playtesting. I've been testing armies with the leaked codex, and I won't necessarily spend some time talking. I'll spend maybe 5 minutes talking about my take on the book, but towards the end of the episode, if you want to know about it. But most importantly, I believe I will be covering it on multiple, more adequately better equipped streams and podcasts from other various famous Age of Sigmar shows, talking about KO overall. But I'm super excited. Got the background up, got my beanie ready. Let's go. I'm super excited for the Carrot on Overlord book. But anyway, let's talk about harnessing play discipline. So I'm gonna bring up the what's it called, the like kind of like the guide of like questions. And once again, like I said earlier, I'll be posting these in the comment section of the video. Okay, so there's kind of like it's a lot of text right now, and these are like a small summary. I would say, well, small. It's a medium-sized summary of like all these questions I think everybody should ask themselves when they're playing the game. And the more you ask yourself those questions, and the more you do it, the faster you'll get at it, and then you'll, I think, make better decisions in the long run. Because it's really what we're talking about here. It's just making sure you minimize the opportunities for mistake that you're going to make, as well as maximize the speed in which you're making good rational decision. And it also helps you in the long run. Sometimes, like, even though you'll find some of these on here, which like, okay, why does that matter? In the grand spectrum of thing, like doing it will basically maybe potentially you'll, because you did this thing, you'll have an opportunity to do something else the next turn you didn't even think about because of how the game flow went, and just because you managed to do this thing because you remembered to do it, it unlocks it. And then we'll go over like what that means. All right. So first question at the top is: did you deploy understanding both your opponent threat range and how you score your first battle tactic? I think most players probably totally get the first part, which is asking your opponent like, okay, like how far does this effective? What's this effective? Like what's this move and charge distance? Can it like teleport and charge? Can it teleport and shoot? What's its range of shooting? How fast does it move? Like understanding how your opponent's army plays helps you better set yourself up for success during deployment, because two things are going to happen. You're going to ask yourself, do I care about its threat range, their threat range, in the grand spectrum of things, and if I do care, how do I basically negate as much of it as possible? But you still have to maintain one huge thing is like how you're going to score your first battle tactic. I see a lot of players, newer ones, especially when they start, they totally understand the threat range thing. It's especially if they're not new to miniature gaming, but then they position themselves and like they get to their first turn and they're like, shit, how do I get this battle tactic? How do I get my first battle tactic? So really understanding not just your opponent's threat range, but like how you're going to score your first battle tactic. And one of the things I mentioned I didn't include in this is like, do you even care about your opponent's threat range? In some situation, the threat range is so massive, or your army is too slow to maybe get on points that like it's like you kind of just have to just eat it, and then hopefully your army is durable enough to be like, cool, like that sucks, but like it's on a case by case basis. But like if you're always going to try to just stay out of your opponent's threat range and not consider how your first battle tactic is going to go, it's really problematic. So armies that just have easy battle tactics to score turn one of that, completely ignoring your opponent's army, are very good because you can just completely deploy defensively. Terrain. Oh my god, newer players, consider terrain, not only the ones you're picking in your territory. Like most newer players, I find, pick a table side or deployment edge because the terrain's like advantageous either due to mysterious or due to line of sight blocking. But most of the time, like you have to really take a pause and consider like, well, what is the terrain on the entire table outside of my territory? Because you're going to have to play with those terrain pieces. And if they impede your army's ability to score points because they're kind of roadblocky, or they funnel you into certain board states that are not basically ideal, like it's more important to consider the terrain outside of your territory than to consider the terrain inside of your territory. The one piece I would say where it gets a little bit like it's key takeaways. If you're playing against a shooting matchup, consider terrain in your territory that can block true line of sight to your buff pieces. That's important for sure. Or overgrown or whatever, the the Wildwoods rule. But for the most part, like you should really understand like how does terrain outside of my deployments will impact my movement to score objectives. When you're thinking about deployment, think about that. That's very important because not the same situation. The first question, you might get in a situation like, how do I score battle tactics in this, later turns if this terrain features are like literally my opponent's using it to his advantage to block my movement to get to score these points. So like 100%, like, and it's a question I see newer players like often don't ask themselves. They consider the terrain in their side and that's it. And sometimes the terrain in the opponent's territory, like, but you really like that's not that matters. I will say one anecdote, like one of the things you maybe want to consider too, and this is going to repeat it somewhere else, and consider desecrate their lands, like because of terrain feature, just have to be within your territory. Like when you're thinking about terrain, like okay, like how do I prevent my opponent from just having an easy desecrate the land early in the game if you can, but like no, that's not necessarily like that's really advanced like thinking. You don't necessarily like just start thinking about how you're going to score points. And how terrain plays into that before you consider how you prevent your opponents like from scoring points. Similar question: did you consider mysterious terrain outside of your territory? So mysterious terrain being like arcane, deadly, and so forth. That one's not so important as the previous one, but sometimes I find that opponents like don't consider, like they're like, cool, there's no arcane in my opponent's territory, so you can't benefit from it. But then there's like arcane in no man's land, where most of the game is going to be fought over. So, so just like consider those elements like as well. Like it being in your territory, like training your territory isn't as impactful as terrain that is outside of your territory for most of the game. So, yay. Um, did you make sure your buff pieces were effective and not at risk? And what that means is, did you deploy them in a way you're maximizing their aura on the current deployment you have, as well as like what their reach for the next following turn when they move, and also not exposed to any potential risk of either shooting or let's say Stonehorn charges, the 3d6 like monstrous actions, which I know it's really hard to block, but you can do with basically making it so they can't land, and there's ways around it. And so like consider that when you place your buff pieces, don't overexpose them because you want to be a little bit more aggressive of where the buff piece is. You got to find that right balance. But just ask yourself, like, before you pick up the before you say you're ready to start the game, like pause, think about like, okay, did I put my buff pieces in the place where I'm actually going to get to use them or make, if my opponent wants to remove them, he has to overcommit and overextend himself to remove them. Did you deploy in a way to have the best outcome, no matter who picks top of one? So that one's tricky. But there are games where I try to position in a way where and so we talked about this threat range, where like it's like, cool, I am on the limit of your threat range, so you're still threatening me, but if you make me go first, because I don't have the turn priority order sequence, I can still be a threat to your army. Like a lot of armies that like are low drop, they're probably gonna make you go first if you're playing against them, and they're gonna position themselves like in a way where they want to be outside your threat range. But if you get too close to them and you're in their, if you could just line up on the line, and then let's just say like their Helon shooting army or an ogre Stonehorn line, they might be enticed to just take first anyway and topple one and just ram it down your throat. So you got to find that one, the middle ground between both. It's like it's still long enough for them to take a risk if they do go first, but it's also, you can still do things if they make you go first. So you got to find that weird like happy medium. And that one's, it's hard to do consistently. Obviously, it's a lot easier. You don't have to think too much about it when you're basically a low drop army yourself, because most of the time the default answer is you're not going first. You're just making your opponent go first. So it's if you keep playing, the thing is the game is going to revolve around more and more battle regiments, more and more low drop armies. So at one point or another, there's just going to be toss ups about who goes first or not in your game. So if you're one drop, like one drop used to be like you're almost always going to go first. So maybe like 60-70% of the time you're going to get to go first. So you're probably better off like planning on like those situations where like, okay, what's my happy medium if my opponent makes me go first, and so I'm not completely wasting an entire turn of doing nothing. Let's see what else is next. Did you pick battle tactics considering the flow of the game? Okay, so that one's also like a question I ask myself post game more than in game, but they're relevant. You should technically think about when you're picking your battle tactics. I like to approach every game during deployment into like, okay, this is what I'm going to score turn 1. This is what I'm going to try to score turn 2. This is what I'm going to try to score turn 3. And then I'll adjust based on how the flow of the game ends up rolling out. But like, I don't think most players think about their battle tactics script until like, unless it's on a per turn basis. And not that it's necessarily bad or like it's not a criticism, but it's okay to defer from the script. You can't just like fix, like you have to understand how the flow of the game is going to make the most ideal decision about which battle tactic you want to score. So I think that's a healthy one to consider post game, not necessarily in game, but it's this is about play discipline, like making sure like you're teaching your brain to think about these things in this manner so you can think about it quickly and subconsciously as you're making decisions. Did you consider your opponent's grand strategy in any point before battle round 3? So like that's another thing that like a lot of players are getting kind of used to. It's like like, they're kind of waiting and seeing like how the game's rolling out. Like if you're all right, am I gonna win by like 6 points, or am I gonna win by like 2 points? And all of a sudden, like battle grand strategy matters. So like they are thinking about it from like towards the later half of the game. Versus like it's okay, like I'm not saying you should commit to stopping your opponent's grand strategy from the beginning, but you should always think about what it will take for your opponent to score that grand strategy. So you can start thinking about like, how do I make plays in which like I'm not sacrificing too much resources to prevent it, but also kind of opening ways for me to stop it early in the game. Like sometimes like, hey, that random chip, like let's say it was like that random chip damage from whatever mechanic you did, that extra wound could have made the difference between like stopping it or scoring it. But because you thought about it and you chose to do it, and then that plays out. Like these are all high upside decisions with very low downside. Is basically the point of these questions. Like if you keep doing these things, you'll have upside potential, but you're not going to have not necessarily any downside to them. So I already said that one. Were you proactive at checking your opponent's war scrolls on the app? So that's another like more discipline thing. For me, I spent a lot of time obviously reading battle tomes, and I don't always get the rules right, but I have a context of like how things should be. And even when I'm in doubt, I'll pull up the app and double check the war scroll. But a lot of people don't do that enough during the game. They only do that after the game. You should be doing this during the game, and it's okay. And it's okay if you're gonna use a clock to pause your opponent's time and say it's going to be on my clock. I want to double check your rule. I want to read the war scroll. It's okay to stop the flow in the game. Don't do it don't use it as a ploy to like disrupt your opponent's flow. Like don't be like interrupting him every bloody time, or interrupting for the same rule over and over and over, which has happened to me before. An opponent of mine has stopped me to check the same rule 6 times during a game on their app. But like, don't do it to be a dick. Just do it. Like, it's okay to it's a social contract. It's okay to check. Like, if it doesn't sound right, like, just give it even if it, to be honest, even if it sounds right, you should proactively check war scrolls. Usually what I do it during deployment as well as during the turn. Like, you should do it as often as possible. And then the more you do it, the faster you'll get used to it, and then it won't take as much time during the game. And I feel like I'm saying things like probably people are like, oh yeah, I know this. Like, well, you'd be surprised. Like the people I coach don't do this. Like I literally have to like when people get used to me, like when I'm coaching games or doing teaching games, they just ask me the rule. I'm like, look it up. It's better you look it up than me telling you. So for other reasons other than just them reading the rule themselves, it's like as we described, building that discipline to do that. Did you plan out your CP usage for the full battle round at the top of the turn? Yeah, and that's another really good one. I think not a lot of people really do very well. I mean, I see my favorite opponent a player I've ever seen do this, I wouldn't say massively, but do it like consistently well is Gavin. Every time I play Gavin, at the top of the turn, he's just like, all right, you could see him mumbling the number of CPs he's gonna get and what he's gonna use it for, and like for the entire battle round. And I think it's it's like that's what I want people to do. Maybe do it more internally so you don't tell your opponent your plan, but that there's a lot of ways to stop it. But like you should do that 100% of the time. Don't go into a turn not realizing you don't have the CP resources to make the things you're trying to do. Always assume you're probably going to need a CP for a reroll charge, and how much does that impact the decision, or all-out attack, or all-out defense, or inspired presence. Like, just think about what you need to successfully make the turn, and so it also plays into like turn order sequencing. If you get to choose who goes first and bottom, if you think about the CP usage, it might actually find rarely, but if you don't know which way to go on the turn order, and you realize like you need more CP to do the things successfully than you need to do, like it's probably better you go bottom of the turn, right? So, but most people when they take turn prio, CP is not an equation in the math. Like it's just literally how many things am I going to get to kill before my opponent gets to kill anything, and or battle tactics, right? We talked about how important going second is, and how much more forethought it takes and how much more patience it takes and discipline it takes to just not always want to go first when you win the priority roll. And that's how that question plays a role into that, but it also plays a role into understanding like limit the limits of your capabilities based on the resource available. It's just another good discipline point to have. Did you forget any of your rules? So this is more of a post game thing. I usually when I learn, like for example, my KO, I played 2 games in the new KO, and I kept forgetting the Admiral extra Ren rule. I guess I hope I'm not leaking anything. I mean, I'm not. I don't have insider info anyway, but anyway, the codex is out there. It's leaked. I was forgetting an Admiral rule every game, so and I have like a post-it note in front of my desk in front of me that just says like, remember Admiral and -1 Ren rule once per game. Like, and like I said, because like in one game, like forgetting that rule made a huge difference. So it's just things like that. Like post game, like you identify which rule you need to remember. You consistently seem to forget, and then so you can work on making sure you remember them. Like get it tattooed on your hands. Just have an alarm on your phone that just basically tells you like the rule name or something. I don't know, whatever, to make sure like you remember your rule. Yeah, like rules to you can use. Did you perform any unnecessary moves, overextend, or charge? So I call that one the Alex Gonzalez special. He's a buddy of mine in Portland. He loves to make charges off objectives before he owns the objective. Don't do that. Like, in fact, like, I'm not teasing him a little bit, but a lot of new players, like, they see a charge opportunity and they're like, cool, I'm taking it, without like, what does the charge buy you kind of like thought process. Like it buys you maybe containing your opponent in their deployment zone, or it buys you killing something, but then like what does that leave, that like footprint? Like once you make that charge, like, how does the board state look now? And rarely do I find making charges off objectives necessarily very beneficial to your army. So you're probably not, it's not like really like, this is once again more of a post-game question, but like really like if you have a habit of doing that and you never, and some people, and I've seen it, players do it, they're like, I made a charge and dice didn't work my way and that's why it went bad. Well, did you need to charge? And most players don't take the time to, they've internalized the loss of the charge or the charge not working out in their favor, but they didn't internalize like, was the charge meaningful? Did it matter? Was staying still more advantageous? Like, so, I mean, if you're sitting on a point, your opponent's going to want to charge you to get that point. So you're going to get in combat no matter what. Like, the advantages of making a charge is the sequencing mechanic or whatever if you have charging bonuses. But the point of the matter still stands. It's that, like, did you actually, like, if you have a game and you're like, oh, I lost because, or I had a bad thing happen because this combat didn't resolve. And it's like, well, and my follow-up question, well, did you charge? Yes. Did you need to make that charge? And then that's when you have to internalize, like, yes, I needed to do it for XYZ reason. But like, don't just make a charge because it looks good. It doesn't value points. Then don't do it. There's no reason to do it. Like, so don't overextend. Bottom line. Did you charge considering where units would end up? So this is another thing, like a lot of players who are more using armies of multiple units get a little tricked up with. Is sequencing of charges tends to be problematic for some newer players, like the dimensionality of like, okay, this unit's going to end here, potentially that unit's going to end there. But because of this unit first landing here, made this guy's charge like slightly longer, because so blah, blah, blah. So like there is this part of like, before you start making charges, did you stop and consider where the unit like what charge sequence it needs to happen in good order for you to not get punished, right? Once again, only upside in that, in thinking about it. There's no downside in thinking about this question. Only upside here. Did you start with the easier charge or the hard ones? I mean, the rule of thumb technically is you're supposed to start the easier charge. Reverse that. You're supposed to start the hard charges first, because you don't necessarily need as much the reroll, the CP reroll for the charge more often than not for the easier ones. You most likely need it for the hard. So you're supposed technically to dice wise start the hard charges. I don't. I write that one down. For me, easier doesn't mean or hard doesn't mean distance. It's easier or hard means where the unit needs to end to be effective. Because you could still have a 6-inch charge, but technically, I want this thing to be at 10 inches to be effective. So, like, because I need the pile-in distance and so forth. So, like, that's the things that matter. It's not like half the distance between the units. It's like, where do you think actually need to end up in the charge to be? That's what you should. That's the measured distance you should think about to be good. And then just start with the longest ones typically first, and then work your way down to the easier one. That's the rationale. It's just I don't know what to tell you. It's just that the average, like, you should, if you're gonna fail one, you probably want to, if you're gonna fail like, you should also, I guess I should say, you should think about which ones are also super critical, because you could still have like a super critical charge, but it's super short range, and you could still fail in Snake Eyes. So you're like, okay, well, I really need it back just in case I need that. But you could still start at the long ones, and then like if you fail the long ones, you're like, cool, I still need it for that critical charge, but you should still charge with the long ones first. Before you, and then reassess this if you need to reroll the charge distance. Did you consider Unleash Hell? And that one is, I think a lot of players get super scared at Unleash Hell because they're like, oh, like that shooting unit gets to shoot me if I charge. I'm like, well, only 6 inches. Models within 6. So is there a way to like really, like, one of the things that you can consider about is like charging a screen unit and then ending only like within range of like maybe like a small portion of this unit that can be shell, and then piling into them if you can basically swing around. So like when I said by did you consider Unleash Hell, did you, when you make the charge, did you like consider how many, is there a way for you to minimize the impact of it if your opponent wants to do it, right? So did you pile in everything even when it was not necessary? Okay, so this is my favorite one to cover, because even I still struggle sometimes on that one, but everybody should really be doing this all the time. Let's say like you have a single model, like a Bloodthirster, charges a unit, and you're like, cool, this is the only unit I want to kill it anyway with the Bloodthirster, and you're like, you should start swinging dice. You don't even think about piling in. Most players, a lot of players they don't even think about the piling move. You should always take your pilot move. It's the bottom of the line. Even it's totally unnecessary, you should always take it. There's been so many games in my experience where, like, because I made this unnecessary pilot move and it opened up that extra distance, opened up something else for me in the later half the game. You should always pile in. It does not matter. Like, well, when I say always, you should always consider piling in and using that distance. You don't necessarily mean you always have to pile in, but you should at least stop and think, do I want to pile in? And more often, yes, you want to pile in. And then finally, did you consider sequencing before activating your first unit? So that's another like melee specific one. Just, a lot of players have, when you're in a multi-combat situation, players have a hard time like with the whole like removing models. And then sometimes, like, if you have one unit already in combat and one that charged, can your opponent like pick up, remove enough models so the one that didn't charge is not out of combat, so you don't get to swing with? Like, sequencing is super important in Age of Sigmar, and when it comes to melee, so you're gonna want to make sure to maximize like that sequencing correctly. So in some cases, it's like, do you want to activate the unit that didn't charge first? Because in case he piles, he removes models away from the unit that did charge, that unit can still pile in even though there's no more units within 3 because it charged, and thus it could get back into melee range. So sequencing is, once again, like super important. And like, this is the kind of list I had built for today. I think it's, I don't know, it's like what, 20-ish questions? But these are all like things even I ask myself during games or after games about like how to, play better. This is about setting up disciplinary decisions during the game. And as you can tell, none of these are army specific. None of these are mission specific. They're just things you should all be thinking about when you're playing the game. And I know it's like my opinion about, like, once again, I'm not the authority in how to play better, but these things help me, and I use them to help other players during when I coach, when I teach. And I think everybody should have kind of this cheat sheet. I've seen players do cheat sheet about, like, when to activate specific roles. You should start with a cheat sheet of like, did you do these things as well? Like did you think about them during the game? And because as you more, like I said earlier, the more you do it, the more likely you will just build that discipline to do it automatically. And yes, it might be, you might not be able to do all of them at once, but if you can just, knock off like half or third, like it doesn't matter. Just build that discipline where now you've made it automatic and you can move on to another third of the list or whatever. And I have a few more I could probably talk about, but for the we're already at the 30-minute mark for me, talking my mouth off. So I want to take some time talk about KO for a little bit. The only thing I'm going to say, because I'm going to cover it a lot more in other shows, and I don't want to spoil content across, is that thank you Games Workshop for basically writing a book that fits exactly the KO playstyle I want, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Fucking fantastically excited to charge ships into combat. So I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully people will enjoy playing my style KO against it or with it. It's way more, it's less non-player interactive than it used to be, which means it's good. Like the KO want to charge. So it's going to be a good army. It's going to be a melee army that just has guns versus a shooting army that just teleports. So I am very excited for the book and playtesting it, or not playtesting, but playing it live at tournaments and events. And you'll probably see me play them at GTs. And probably, I don't know if I'll go 5-0 with them. Maybe, who knows? But I'm just looking forward to just engaging ramming speed. So anyway, thank you for watching. Sorry that I have not had an episode the last 2 weeks. Just a lot of stuff in my life, and obviously I do this as a hobby and more than anything. And I appreciate all you guys listening to the show. And like, subscribe, do that whole YouTube jazz thing. And then, let me know if this helps you at all, if you want, or if you have any questions about it on the comment section of the video. I'll be answering any questions you guys have. And have a lovely, happy KO week for all of you.